Well, hello there and welcome to this video. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm guessing you're interested in learning more about FileMaker Pro. And today we're continuing in our series about data and we're taking a look at join tables. So stick around and we'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what are we taking a look at today? Well, in the previous video, what we were looking at was relationships. So if you'd like to follow along, you're probably going to be using this option right here in FileMaker. I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16 as I'm shooting this video. Of course, most of what we learn in FileMaker will work for future versions and later versions as well. FileMaker, the fundamentals of how you get things done really doesn't change too often. So you can choose this option, New Solution. If you've already been watching this series, then we already have a file that I have started, and we'll just give a quick rundown of that file. Now, I had called the file Relationships because we learned about FileMaker's relationships in the previous lesson to this one, in lesson 4. So what we had started to do is we started to create a connection where we were connecting a person, we had a people table, to a number of events. So when we look at our defined database, it's really simple. If you'd like to replicate this, you can always pause the video if you're watching the replay. If you're live, then hopefully you've gone through the previous lesson. So we've got just two simple tables. We've got people and events. And in our people table, we of course are going to have a primary key. I've talked about that a lot. A name, category, which we aren't using yet, but we will when we start to filter data out and we start to learn about portals and how they allow us to filter. And in our events table, it's really simple there too. We have an ID field, we have a name field, and we have a foreign key of ID people. Now, if it isn't obvious at this point in time, I'm going to go to Manage Layouts, and we'll zoom in on that. Now, I have two of these particular layouts, and I've shown you in previous videos, if you go back and look at the video titled Developer Tables. I typically create a dedicated table. Oops, got a little notification there. Let me fix that. Set my operation mode to silent so I don't get any of those notifications in the background using that firewall software. Then what we do with developer tables is it allows us to see the data behind the scenes, to see and know where the connections are. So we'll just do a very quick, brief overview here where we will create a developer table for people. And I'm just going to do this based off of, and I'll do one for events as well. At events. And we'll just get those really quickly opened so that we can see what's going on. And I'm going to move those up to the top right there. Now, this is something that I do in most all of my databases. I like to be able to have my layout reserved for designing for the user interface and then the developer table so I can see what's going on behind the scenes, because I always like to be able to see things in table view. But that's not the view that I put my layouts within. So I'll click open with both of those selected, and we don't have anything on them yet, but we will get things on them very quickly by going to Command in layout mode, going to Command K, and we specifically set our drag options that we want things horizontal. We don't want any labels, and now we can just throw all of these on the layout. Very easy, quick to do. Go into browse mode and view the data. So there we go. And same with over here. Same field picker. We've got our options. They're still set to the same. We select everything from our events table and we throw it on the layout. Go into browse mode and view our data. All right. So we have everything set up that's really comfortable for us to see as developers now, and we can take a look at what we need to do with regards to this data and join tables. Now, join tables, and I'm going to create one more window really quickly here. So the wonderful thing about FileMaker, always remember you can create as many windows as you need in order to see whatever you want to see. So this would be my primary layout, working right here where I'm designing. Then down here, we've got my two different developer tables where I like to see the data going on, or what's going on behind the scenes. I'm going to create a new record in this, and I think last time I had a Bob Smith. And we have a portal that allows creation, and I had him going to DevCon 2016, and then a new record was DevCon 2017. Now what we have in here is we have a many-to-many relationship, meaning many people can join many events. But this poses a problem that we always have to consider, and we always take into account the data that we're working with and what happens when we see any type of duplicate data. And we want to break things down when we start to structure our database based fundamentally on what are the core elements, what are the entities. An entity is a word that you'll hear me use frequently. We've already taken a look in a previous video of when we are designing our database. The primary reason that I call this particular table people is because ultimately I'm dealing with people. I'm dealing with people who can be customers, people who can be vendors, people who can be employees, people who can be students. I'm dealing with people. I'm not dealing with the abstract notion that we apply to people. Same thing happens with any other item. So in this particular scenario, by joining people directly to events, what I'm saying is that events are sort of more or less an attribute of a person in the way that I've connected them right now. I'm saying because people connect directly to events, those events are attributes because any one person can have multiple events, but likewise, more than one person can have the same event. So that causes a problem, and we now have to move the data into a different direction, into the direction of join tables. We're going to see that appear right now when we go to adding Bob to DevCon 2018. And I don't want that return in there. I just want that to be accepted. And this is what we get as a result. We now have duplicate data. We have DevCon 2018 appearing 2 different times. So we now have to ask ourselves the question as a new FileMaker learner, is this ultimately what we want? Maybe initially we thought, okay, we'll connect events to people, and we want people to be able to have events, and we can definitely see them within the portal when we're flipping through here. We've got Bob, and then I flip to Matt, and yep, Matt's attending DevCon 2018 and 2019, and I can see that Bob did attend 2016 and 17, and he's going to 2018. But from a data storage standpoint, this is no good, no bueno. So we want to break this out into a join table. And a join table is simply going to be any table that's going to join 2 entities. So we now need to treat this in the scenario of we really only want to have one FileMaker DevCon 2016, 17, 18, 19. So that's what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to convert this into a join table structure or plan for that from the very outset. So how easy is it to do in this particular scenario? Well, it's not too difficult. We've got all of our IDs. We simply just need to set up the structure. So going into our defined database, scrolling off a little bit, scrolled off the wrong way there. There we go. What we're definitely going to need is a new table. And this is the difficult part when it comes to join tables. How do we actually think about naming our join tables? And to be honest with you, sometimes it's difficult for me to come up with things. And so sometimes I will just name them, just something that makes sense in the moment, knowing that I can always rename something later on down the road. Now, events already is the name of the table that I want for my events. I want a canonical value for an event. And when I use the word canonical, it's basically meaning it is the absolute. It's the final say. It's basically there is no other occurrences of that particular item. So we're going to join people to events, and we need the name of a table. Typically, the name of your table is actually what you were initially thinking of it as in the first place. So the first thing that came to my head in this scenario is if people are attending, there we go. This is the wonderful thing about talking to yourself as you develop your database. The questions that you ask ultimately end up providing you with the information you need. So I'm going to call this one, if I'm spelling it right, attendees for my new table because people attend events. or participants, or whatever you want to have it named. Now I just dragged that there, and I probably, I did that just because I wanted to show the distinction between people and attendees is going to join to events. But remember, when we upload, we would want to see these according to name order, or we would want to set this so that it's something when it gets uploaded that makes sense. All right, so in attendees, all that we're going to need is something from both sides of the tables. And in this case, it's going to be two sets of foreign keys. If we look at our relationship graph, what we have right now is we've got a blank attendees table. And let's move this all the way over here. Let's let this one sit in between because that's what it's going to do. A join table is nothing more than something that joins two different tables together so that you can ultimately have what you want is that canonical entity of events. So what are we going to need in both of them? Well, it's going to be the foreign key of whatever primary table you're connecting to. And if you've taken a look at my previous videos, for me, this is very easy. There's no complex naming structure. I know that in attendees, I'm going to have ID underscore people because I'm connecting to that table occurrence. And I'm also going to have ID underscore events because I'm connecting to that table. So let's go create those. So in attendees, I'm simply going to have ID people. That is going to be a type of text because we're using FileMaker's UUID. And I'm also going to have ID events and create that one as well. Now here is a critical thing that some developers do this, some of them do not. This is what I prefer to do no matter what, no ifs, ands, or buts, always and forever. I always add a primary key to every table. It's just something that I've learned over time that ultimately, even if it's not immediately needed right now, I end up doing it. So I've switched over to the people table, and I'm going to copy the primary key there because I know that that's already in the standardized format that I like to use with all the settings, which is an auto enter. I go back over to attendees and I paste that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the settings, we can look at those briefly. We are simply using a calculated value, which we can see is, I keep zooming out there, I mean to do this, just FileMaker's get UUID. Pretty straightforward. Now, I've talked about this in previous videos, but you can and probably should choose this option right here of prohibit modification of value during data entry. For me, I don't worry about it too much, and I've mentioned this as well, because I'm never exposing my primary and foreign keys. I'd never put them on the layouts, no matter what. It's just a rule that I follow. They are for me as the developer behind the scenes. So what we're going to find out is by adding that ID or that primary key to the attendees, even though it's not needed in this situation, it is not going to be used. It is just there for future use in case we actually need it. Ultimately, what's needed are only these two foreign keys in order to facilitate the join. So let's take a look in the relationships, how that's actually going to work out. All right, so we are going to break this structure right now. Now, currently, we already have data in the database, and this becomes a difficulty if you've come to the point where you've already added data and you now want to migrate this data. Of course, the best way to do this is to first close your database and save a copy before you're going to do anything that can potentially be destructive. I'm not too worried right here because I'm able to actually get the data out. I'm not changing the data structure, so I'm still going to have the keys and going to be able to make that join happen. So I'm going to select on the relationship and hit delete and break the relationship between the files, putting in the join table in between, linking my ID to my foreign ID of ID people, and linking my ID from events to my ID of events. All right, so now we have our join table structure where everything is going to be joining together. The difficulty that we have is we need to be able to add items right here. So we're going to turn on the allow creation of records in this table. Now, up to this point, everything we've been doing is just manually typing in these values. Of course, what we're going to want to give users the ability to do is to select from a value list, just be able to choose from an item, and we'll have to add that in when we do value lists. So our portal is going to go blank right now, And again, as I've mentioned, I like to be able to see how things work on screen in between. I'm going to go to that Manage Layouts again. And FileMaker did create an attendees table for me, or excuse me, an attendees layout. Now I'm just going to repurpose that layout because FileMaker created it for me, and I'm not going to be using a layout based on the attendees table occurrence for anything to do with the user interface, at least not currently. So I'm just going to rename that as a developer table for me. And again, most of these developer tables, you'll have to go back to a previous video if you don't understand why I add this @ symbol. That is primarily just a nomenclature. It's a way that I name things so that I can identify what's a developer table versus a user interface table. And I will also do that within the, just this previous video, I show where I use a dedicated table occurrences also prefixed with that @ symbol. So I'll move that up there in between as a join table, and I will open it right now so that I can see what's going on, and I will select right there. All right, so now that we have everything on screen, we can now see the true nature of how a join table works. We'll have to hook things up, and we'll do that, but let's just get the data in there so that we can actually see what's going on, because now we're working with more than 2 tables and table occurrences. So over here, this is the best way to actually learn how a join table works, is to actually join up the data yourself, then put it into the user interface. So what we had previously is we had 3 events that were, we need to look at the data, that were assigned to Bob. This was Bob's ID, 1BFAA. This was my ID. That's 9E9B. So we need to join these up, and we're going to put them into this join table. I'm just going to create the records. You can see that the auto ID is being created, but we're not confused by that because we're not worried about it. Let's zoom out and zoom in here so that it's not blocking. All right. So we have to decide. We have a number of events here, and again, our whole purpose was just to have one of any one of those events. We don't want 2 DevCon 18s. We only want one of them because there's only one that exists at any given point in time. Think about this. We would be adding dates and times to all these events. It just wouldn't make sense. So we need to get these right here over into here. Now, currently there is no structure. So what we need is we need to take the ID for each of these individual events. So let's do that first. So first off, are we going to have 2018s? We're not. So let's take this 2018. We will ignore this 2018. The rest of them are all still unique. So we're going to copy each of these into the events table. Remember, we're going from events to an ID or a foreign key that is events. So let's take the 2019. Put that one, and we'll get the 2016, and we'll put that one here, and the 2017 right here. All right, so now we need to actually join them to the actual people. So we need to put the people keys for whatever events those people were joined in. Now remember, the one that we had, which was 2018, that's a duplicate. So we need to look at that, or we need a duplicate of that. We need to look at this one, EB9E. We had 2 of those. So we've got that one. Where is that? That's actually showing the key. Oh, E6 is, there we go. Perfect example of how we get confused with keys. It can get, without these on screen, it can be very confusing sometimes. I said we were going to have 2 2018, or we have 2, but we only want 1 in this table, and I said we're going to use this first one. I just got confused, and I was looking for this key value over here. That shouldn't exist. We're going to be deleting this record. So it's E619 that I actually need to get a copy of. So I'm going to duplicate that one right here. So from a key standpoint, and trust me, this may seem like it's boring because you're like, oh my gosh, Matt, you're looking at all of these IDs and what's going on. This is what you have to learn if you want to have a well-structured database. What we're doing right now is called normalization. And there's levels of normalization, and you don't have to normalize all the way out to what they call the 5th level. You can basically decide what you want to do or how you want your database to perform, but knowing how to normalize is part of being a good database developer, how to actually structure data. All right, so we have two records in this join table that represent the 2018 event. So now we should be able to hook them up. I'm actually at this stage now forgetting who was in which event, so I'm sort of going to go arbitrary here. I need to get the key. Hopefully I'm not blocking that. But I need to get the key for Bob Smith. I know that he was in 3 of them. And I'm going to put his key here. So I'll paste his key, and I don't know which one was 2016. We'll just arbitrarily assign 3 of these, and then we'll go get my key right here, and we'll put me in these 2. And we'll see what happens as events show up. Did you notice right up here that data started showing once again? We should be able to now go to this layout. So let's make sure our data is how we want it to be on screen. All right, we have over here, we have 2 people, and we've got their primary keys. And we know that Matt had 2 items and Bob had 3 items. So here we go. I have 2 items, Bob has 3 items. Perfect. We've got our foreign keys for all of our people. We also have all of our foreign keys for all of our events. And when we look at those should match up as well. We should be able to basically get rid of this one because we no longer want to deal with having duplicates. So I'm going to delete that with Command or Control E, which will bring up this little item right here. Another little trick, if you know that you want to get rid of this, and once you become a nice advanced FileMaker developer and you're comfortable with the process, you can bypass any of FileMaker's dialog boxes with the Option key. So if I do use Option Command E, it will forcibly delete this record and get rid of it. It's gone now. So it's a good tip to know as you're working with data, just be able to just get rid of it. But once you get rid of it, it's gone. There is no undo for a delete. You can't get that data back. All right, so this is cool. I'm going to sort this really quickly. We now have our canonical list of all of our data of 2016, 17, 18, 19. There will be no other duplicates of any DevCon events. But yet I can now join as many people to as many different events as desired. And we can see that when we look at the defined database, and we can see all of the different crow's feet. Now, how do you arrange this? Well, how you arrange this really depends on how you like to structure your graph. This does allow the creation right here. I'm going to put that plus just so that we can see that we do have this option of allow creation turned on, where attendance can be created. But notice when I click on the events, events cannot create attendees, and attendees cannot create events. It does not make sense. It is possible, though, and I'll mention this because there will be some situations, there will be some scenarios where you want to be able to, when you've got many tables away, and this is basically one table away, I believe is what a lot of people call this. I think of it as 2 tables away because if I'm looking at a layout based on people, I am 1-2 tables away. But some people think that this is the first table and this becomes 1 table away from that. I don't know if there is a actual one. We've got this item right here that says, nope, there is no one, there's a 1 table away. Select related tables 1 away. So if you use FileMaker's terminology, this would be 1 table away and this would be 2 tables away. But it's really up to what you're used to. All right, so we have our structure right now. We can see on the relationships, many people can be many attendees, and those many attendees can be joined to many events. And so it should make sense when you think about the logic in your head. And so what we have now is we have one final thing that we need to fix. That right now, what we're doing, if we go into layout mode, we can see and hide the color, the field picker. We are on our people table occurrence, or this is our layout name called people. On our, see, here's where FileMaker, again, gets confusing. FileMaker, I've talked about this before, FileMaker interchangeably uses the words table occurrence and table. You are not actually, you're not if this is called people, it's only called people because you named it people. It is a table occurrence. FileMaker's probably renamed this word right here from table to table occurrence because you're not looking at the table people. You're looking at a table occurrence that happens to be named people that in turn happens to be connected to people. Very key thing if you're a new FileMaker developer and something that hopefully you won't get confused by. But we are looking at that table that is one away. Our context, when we look at the defined database, is this. So we are looking at data from the events table now, and that's not actually what we want when we're typically using a join table. When we're using a join table, we typically want the table that is closest to what we've just joined to, because that's the accurate representation of data. But yet the perspective is anything that's connected to each other, it can basically see anything along that line according to whatever the conditions are of the relationship. Remember, the relationship, as we learned in the previous video, that is the final determinant of what data actually gets to get through. Think of these as pipes between what's stored in these tables. If this pipe allows you to see things only based on a range of dates between 2 years, and if those 2 years you've hard-coded in, that means that's the only thing that could ever be seen. If, on the other hand, you were using global fields, then you would only be able to see the data according to whatever values the user has put into those global fields. So in other words, the contents that can come through this pipe can change based on what the user puts into global fields. This is where you get control as the developer. So we need to change that portal from events to attendees. And we're going to do that now. We're going to double click and we're going to change it to attendees. That gives us the most accurate representation because for this person, we want to know what are all of the events that that person is attending. And so I'll make that change. Now, here is a key thing that you have to remember. Let's go back to that relationship graph. We are now set up in a structure, and if I use the colors that I use when I'm developing, a layout would be purple, and then a portal for me is blue. You can follow the same or come up with a different convention if you want. But this instantly tells me, because of my own chosen conventions, okay, my primary layout is people. I have a join table in between of attendees, and that attendees is basically keeping a list for each person of all of the events that they are attending canonically. But nowhere in the attendees do I have any of the information that actually makes sense, that I actually want to show. If I expand this and look at the contents of this, the only thing in this whole table are key values. Those key values are meaningless to the user. So the user has to be able to see something that is the human readable name. And here is where you get the benefit that, as I stated, anywhere along the chain of all of these items, you can extract or get any other piece of information. So the events table is storing what I actually want, the name field. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm showing a portal based on the attendees table, the table that's connected most closely to people, but where the data is that I want to see is in the one table away. So I need to make that change. So I changed this from the events table to the attendees table, and this field I want to double click and make sure that yes, indeed, it is still the name field. In fact, FileMaker was kind enough to make that change for me, or to keep that change for me. Remember, it still kept this portal, which you can always see the portal down at the bottom, what table occurrence it's actually tied to. This was still the events table. But that's not the table I wanted to see. I wanted to see the attendees table. So when I changed it by double clicking it, like such, and switched where this table, this portal is showing data from, when I switched it from events to attendees, FileMaker kept the field of the name in there. But if I didn't have anything in this, the point that I'm trying to make is that I would have to know that where's the human readable data that I want to display. Is it in attendees? It is not. It is in events. And this same concept applies when we're dealing with value lists a lot of the time. So I want to see the name of the event, and I don't want the label. And so now everything should be as I would expect, except for the case that I am not going to be able to edit this field. Notice, if you're following along and you've rebuilt this structure, notice that I can no longer click into, this portal, this last portal row that we just learned about in the previous lesson, this is the record creation row. But with the field, the name in this, we have to go back to our graph and look at why can't I click into this field? Why won't FileMaker let me click into this field? It does when there's already a relationship, but can I create a new one? I can't. And it's all based on the rules that you have set up in the graph. And it makes complete sense once you reflect on it. I have set up this graph to say, when I look at this relationship, we've got that little plus icon. I allow the creation of attendees, attendants in this sense. So from people, I'm going to allow the creation of an attendance record. Do I allow the creation of an actual event? In this case, I do have it there. I want to have that unchecked because in this scenario, I'm not. So I had that accidentally checked. But the answer is no. I should not be able to create a new event for this particular person because I'm not creating an event for the person. I'm creating a new event, if I did allow creation on this relationship, for all people, meaning I'm making a DevCon 2020, a DevCon 2001, meaning it's accessible to all people now because anyone could attend that event. So this is where you get into value lists, and that's why I covered value lists at the very beginning of this little sub-series, is until you understand how to make your related value lists or to make the value list that you want, this scenario is now not possible where I would be able to just click in here. I can't just click in here. I now need a value list in order to connect this up so that I can just come in and just add a person. And our next goal would be to add a value list up to the top with a little, there's so many ways that you can add things to portals, and we'll be covering that in the next lesson. You can give a value list. You can provide a button bar with options of 2 years in front and 2 years behind, and that can dynamically change on a year-by-year basis. This is where you get into choices that you get to make as the developer in terms of how you want to present the method upon which a user can actually add a new event. So that's what we're going to get into for the next video in this series. At this stage, I'm going to go to my questions. If you have any questions, now is a good time to actually come up with those. We'll take a look in the chat. I hope I've done a good job of explaining everything I can about a join table and how and why it's beneficial. Anytime that you come across a situation where you start to see that the potential for duplicate data exists, that's when you typically want to break that table off and actually use a join table in between to join things. And our scenario of our very classical invoices, line items, products, that is the most stereotypical reference that a database developer or instructor will always tend to use, is you're going to have an invoice, and that invoice is going to have products added to them. You're only ever going to have one of a given type of product, but yet you want to add that one given type of product to many different invoices. Therein, it dictates creating that join table. So hopefully this has explained it to the degree that it makes sense, and what happens when you have relationships set a certain way and you're able to actually put the join table in and set it up. That's why I went through the process of the keys. All right. Enough chitter chatter, Matt. Let's switch over to my video chat and see what we've got, if anybody came in with the comments. All right, so it looks like we had one. HBH group, goodbye mother-in-law. Hello, FileMaker. Yeah, I had to mention that I didn't live stream yesterday because I had to move my mother-in-law. All right. Can you use one join table for multiple joins? I don't know. Or maybe we can get some clarification on that with regards to multiple joins. If I'm interpreting that correctly, when you say multiple joins, are you meaning to join multiple different types of data? Say, for example, in this one, I have people, and then I'm adjoining attendees to not just DevCon events, but also to, I don't know, other things like user groups and whatever, and then use the same join table. If that's the question, my answer to you is pretty much anything you want to do in FileMaker, you can make it work. Does it follow standards or best practices with regards to how you structure out data? It may not, but if you can facilitate how it needs to work, you can typically wire it up and make FileMaker do that. So yes, I would be able to use one single join table, and then through the process of classifying data, actually be able to join multiple different tables to another table. And then again, remember with relationships, the really cool thing with relationships is that if you remember that in these relationships, because of our ability to have multiple predicates, because of our ability, everything that we learned in the previous lesson, being able to have all of these multiple predicates allow us to filter out data to see and extract whatever we want to extract, which is completely, based on your solution and how you want to show things. So the question always comes down to, for me, within FileMaker, not necessarily whether it can be done, but more on the side of whether it should be done and what's the most effective way to be done. Because most of the time you can do it. You could very easily use one common join table across multiple different types of data or different types of entities as I'll reference them. I'll think of an event as an entity, and then maybe I have a different entity and I use one particular join table in between. You can do that, but it's not suggested. Typically what you want to do is you want the relationship graph to be a good visual representation of what is the structure of your data. And so if I had a different type of table, I would create a different join table. One thing to remember in FileMaker is one thing that developers always think is that there's a big consequence to it, and that is adding tables and adding fields. Adding tables and adding fields is very cheap and very inexpensive. A table that you add is just there, that is something else that you have to manage. It's only when you get data in those tables and when you start to create complex data structures between them that things start to get complicated for FileMaker. Again, FileMaker and most all systems are cumulative in terms of the more things that you add in and the more complexity that you add, that's when things start to get slower and slower. Just the mere fact of adding something, there's very little consequence for tables and fields. So I'll just leave it at that. And that's something you'll come across. All right, let's see if there's any more questions that we had in here as I switch to Chrome. All right. To keep tables to a minimum. There we go. Hopefully that answer gave you the answer there. Don't worry about keeping tables to a minimum. And don't worry about having relationships that you basically deem as necessary. The goal isn't to keep things so trim in terms of the number of items that you have. It's to think creatively about the data, about what I want to do. There's a notion in FileMaker development, in particular, that it's existed before, but I call it narrow versus wide, and you'll hear this as well. And I'll give you the best example for this really quickly before we wrap up and I get to a few of these other questions. Here is a very good example of narrow versus wide. And we'll probably do a whole section on this. All right. This people table is extremely small right now. I only have 3 fields. And yes, ideally my goal is to keep the field count as low as possible. But what happens is, as you add things to a FileMaker database, you're typically adding them based on the limitation of ignorance. Ignorance being that if you don't already know that, wow, I could store a lot more addresses if I used another table, than if I put them into this particular table. Because what happens is every time that you add a new field, so if I add the new field of address, and if I call it address 1, and I add that, I've now made this table more wide, meaning I'm adding more fields. And as I'm adding more fields, I'm going wider and wider and wider and wider. So then I end up adding address 2. And now I need a second address. Okay, I will do fine. Second 1, and I'll create that. And I of course have a line 2 for my address. Second 2, create. You can see what I've already done. I've now gone 4 fields wider in this table, wherein if I had taken the opportunity to create a separate table called addresses, then that addresses table would basically only have these 2 fields in order to facilitate an unlimited number of related records for a given person. Now, here comes the question. Do I actually do that? Do I take that level of normalization on this particular situation? And this is when you have to start to ask other questions. What is the reality that I'm going to have or absolutely need to track more than X addresses? Let's say it's more than 4. In most solutions, I don't know that there are that many times, unless you know that people have that many addresses, and you know I need to be able to track 5 different addresses. You're now stuck at a question. It's a juncture. Do I normalize this database by saying I want the ability to have an unlimited number of addresses because I know that that's a streamlined, efficient structure? Or do I just bite the bullet and throw the fields into this table and make it go more wide? Knowing that if a user wants to go to that 3rd level of an address, I just tell them, go use the notes field, or switch out the primary address and make a note that you change the address so that you have some type of log that the older address was this. Because in reality, the number of times that you need an actual address really boils down to where is that person at this point in time. Okay, fine. I want my database to be faster and more efficient because it's easier to search for people within this database, searching for, let's say, all people within a given zip code that have a certain last name. When it's all in the same table, it's very fast and easy for FileMaker. As soon as you break data out into separate tables, the search becomes more complex because what FileMaker has to do is it has to do what's known as an ad hoc join when it's going to search across multiple tables. So those are advanced concepts. I definitely want you to know about them, but that is the decision that you have to make when you start to think about normalizing data, which we've done today through the join table, versus just having a table grow more and more wide. So hopefully that's a good explanation there that benefits you. So we'll cancel that, discard that, flip over to my questions, and see if we've got anything more here. All right. Can you set a self-join to rely on a private group? I'm going to say, since I don't understand without context, off the top of my head, yes. You can do any given FileMaker table occurrence can connect to any other FileMaker table occurrence, even if it's the same table. The only thing you can't have in FileMaker is a complete circular relationship. And FileMaker will show a little dialog when you attempt to do that and actually not allow you to have a circular relationship. Because a circular relationship would basically be like a never-ending loop that FileMaker wouldn't, it doesn't have a point A to point B resolution, or I should say A to Z resolution, where it can actually resolve everything in between. It would have to keep going around and around and around, and it just won't do that. All right, Rana, today I come online. Yes, I did get your email, and I'll try to get to that. Again, doing these for free. I'd love to do personal consulting, but just don't always have the time. All right, so the portal would be based on the join table itself, but the fields within it come from the related tables. Doesn't make sense to display fields from the join table. Do we get that right? HBH group, there are times where you do, this is another complex thing of FileMaker. We find out later that where we derive or where we store data really comes down to the structure that we're putting in place. In our scenario right here that we took a look at today, where we have attendees, let's use the invoices example. In the invoices, products, and then line items example, what a lot of FileMaker developers come across is they want to generate a report, and they want to generate a report of all of the things that a person purchased. And so they attempt sometimes to actually generate based on the products, because their thought process is, I want to know all of the products this person bought. But where the data actually exists, or where they should drive the report from, is within the line items table, because that's where all of the individual records are for the products. But the thought process is, but the name of the product is over in the products table, so I should drive the report from the products table, right? No, you have to drive the report from the line items table and then reference the data that is the human readable data from products. And the same thing applies in this scenario within the attendees list. Let's extrapolate this out a little bit. Within the attendees example, what we have is a situation of, what if we come across a situation that at DevCon 2017 or 2018, we want to collect some survey information, or we just want to collect some little pieces of information. Where should we put that information for each person? Well, there's two places we can put it. We can actually put a field into the attendees table of notes, and that allows us to keep notes for that person for that particular event. So we've got it in both directions. But optionally, a better way to do this is to create yet another table that you're going to hang off of the attendees. So you're now going to put a table that's going to connect to the join table for the purpose of collecting information from the person about the event upon which they actually attended. So that's where you get into the complex structures, where you start to be able to say, okay, how am I going to structure this data so that it facilitates my solution? And that's what you have to think about. You have to know that you're going to use a join, and then know that you may be tacking on additional tables off of that join table or to the main table. I mean, it can get really complex really quick, and this is the most simplest example, but yeah, you can do all those types of things. All right. Hi, Matt. We make a great use of the perfect, Nuri. Glad to hear it. Super clear. Excellent. Not private, privileged group. I'm guessing you're asking about security in this with regards. Why don't you formulate the question with as many specifics as you can, put it down into the comments, and let me process that. Again, anybody here watching these videos, if you want my best response, send me an example file. Rana, I know that you did, and I will definitely try to get to that as quickly as I can outside of my other work that I have to do. And that's the best way. And put a comment in the actual file, and then I'll do my best to get to it. I'd like to filter a table based on security settings. Yes. Again, it's totally doable. I'll have to, that might actually make for a good video. Osteen, or you'll have to tell me how to pronounce your name. Yeah, send that in. That's a good idea for an example when you want to only allow users within a portal to see certain data, maybe based on who created it, or maybe based on, a manager being able to see all of an employee's data and their own, but employees only being able to see employees. Yes, those are all valid solutions, and all things that you can basically get out of your database via filters. We just have to put the fields in the right place, wire things up correctly, and we can make it happen. All right, so I think that's going to be a wrap for today. And as always, I like to welcome you to subscribe to the magazine as I get up my audio here. There we go. And obviously, if you're interested, you can subscribe here on YouTube. Click the little bell if you want notification via your mobile device or on desktop. And I do my best to notify you via the magazine site, but of course, check the magazine site out. Next video is going to be coming up right here. And until next time, much luck and happy file making. Thanks for tuning in. See you at the next video.